Remember when superhero movies were the biggest thing in the world? At first they felt fresh and exciting, but over time every film looked and felt the same. The formula got stale, audiences burned out, and by 2025 the genre collapsed under its own weight. Well, that same cycle now is hitting the internet. Only this time, instead of Hollywood blockbusters, it's AI-generated slop that's invading Google, YouTube, journalism, and the internet as a whole. It's a huge problem that could kill the internet. Is there a solution? Well, I think there might be one or two. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. I have thought a lot about AI slop recently because I am a YouTube content creator and also on X as well, although I feel it more acutely on YouTube. So first, let's just start by defining our terms here. AI slop is the endless stream of generic, low-quality content that's churned out by bots that clogs up the internet and drowns out real human voices. You could think of generic blog posts, copycat AI-generated YouTube videos that pump out huge numbers of videos on whatever is trending, fake reviews, completely fictional Pinterest and Instagram posts, and even bot replies. And like superhero fatigue, it threatens to ruin the experience for everyone. Creators, companies, and especially we, the audience. For now, at least, the easiest argument about when we're encountering AI slop is kind of that I know it when I see it argument. It's the idea that when you see it, when you encounter it, you're like aware of the fact that it feels wrong. The voices feel wrong. The images or video just seems thrown together. There doesn't seem to be a lot of care with that. So you kind of know it when you see it. But of course, the problem is that this AI slop is getting better and better, so it's becoming harder and harder to identify it. And I think a lot of people who are not paying particular attention might not even notice anymore. So why does this matter? It actually matters on a lot of different levels. For one thing, from an audience's point of view, we're getting content that's generic, that's copycat, that could potentially be manipulated by hostile forces. And for content creators, both companies and individuals, it has a massive economic impact, which could effectively kill the internet, which of course is where the title of this video comes from. So for years, as I'm sure all of you know, the economy of the internet was kind of the click economy. This was something that was created by Google and really perfected by them, and others have done it as well. But basically in Google, you search for something. You say something like, I want to buy a new pair of running shoes. You type that into Google. It gives you a bunch of links. Some of those are advertised links. Then Nike or Hollywood shoes or whoever you clicked on, they pay Google a small amount of money for that click. And with trillions of clicks, you get a lot of money. Individual websites, like a website that might evaluate running shoes, so best running shoes of 2025 or something along those lines, those websites of course get crawled, and when you search in Google, you can click on those websites. Those websites could also run Google ads inside of them, and so basically the click process that goes through all of those things generates money. Some of that money goes to the website that actually generated the content itself, and that's how these content creators are able to stay in business. But of course, in 2025 in particular, we are shifting away from that click economy and towards a generated answer economy. I'm sure you have seen it even when you type in Google now, you get an overview, an AI overview that pops up before you even get to any of the links below it. And of course, that has massive consequences, in particular to Google, but also to the content creators that make web pages, like, for example, best running shoes of 2025. If you get an AI generated answer and you're satisfied with that answer, you don't have to click on anything. You don't have to go to the website. Google doesn't get any money. The website doesn't get any money, and the entire industry, that click industry, collapses. And we can get more specific about that. For Google, AI generated search overviews have cannibalized about 30 to 40% of their click-through traffic. That has dropped by 30 to 40%. I'm sure if you're a YouTube watcher, which I guess you are since you're watching this video, you've also noticed that things like education and science videos, creators in that realm have gotten drowned out by low-quality copycat videos, and in particular because YouTube is trying to chase the TikTok shorts, YouTube's algorithm is now favoring shorts over long format thoughtful videos, like hopefully this one is for you. So the problem for me as a content creator on YouTube is that my videos are being watched by far fewer people than watched them a year ago, for example, and that has definite economic impacts on me as a content creator. I don't make nearly as much money, in fact about a tenth of what I used to make. It is a massive shortfall. And for YouTube itself, they're also losing out on original content because people like me will eventually abandon the platform because we'll be like, well, we can't make a living on this or even a partial living on this anymore. So we'll go off and do something else. We'll spend our time doing something else instead of creating YouTube videos. And then YouTube becomes just this giant trove of AI generated content that's copying itself over and over again without the new content that comes in from actual humans that creates the interest and the content that AI generated videos are actually copying. So it's a pretty devastating problem. And of course, this goes far beyond YouTube. YouTube, it goes to Instagram, it goes to TikTok, it goes to written documents on the internet, it goes to journalism and fact-finding and scientific research being shared. All of that is being threatened by this slop that could easily overwhelm the actual human content being produced. So the problem here is really the problem of Ouroboros. If humans stop producing content, what is left for AI to train on and create? If you don't know the Ouroboros, it's the snake that eats its own tail. The problem with AI is that essentially you're going to get mode collapse. If AI can only train on other AI, you're going to get garbage in, right? The quality of the data coming in is going to just be other AI rather than human input, and that's going to lead to degraded output. The degraded output will lead to more degraded input on the other end, and it will just continue around and around where the AI snake eats its own tail until you just have generic low-quality muck that exists on the internet with less and less fresh input from humans and less journalism being done and less research being done and less educational content being shared. It is a significant problem all around. So what we could get in just a few years is a reduction to the mean. In other words, a reduction of the information and everything that's on the internet to the generic, to the uninteresting, and even potentially to the false. What we'll lose is oddity, new information, and the quest to overcome our human limitations. That's part of what we love about ourselves and our stories and learning about other people and the information. We're storytellers, and stories require something new, something interesting to hold our attention. And speaking of stories, just like Thanos said in the Avengers, I am inevitable. AI slop feels inevitable too, but maybe, just maybe, we can be Iron Man and it's not inevitable. So what are some things that humans can do that AI can't do at this point? Well, AI can't interview people, it can't investigate, it can't break news, it can't do new scientific research, and I will say not yet. At this point, it can't do that. Maybe at some point in the future it will, and this whole thing breaks down and there's no need for humans in the loop at all anymore. I hope that's not the case. But at least at this point, AI can't create that new information. It can only take in information that other people, human beings in this case, have actually discovered and brought into the data set that this AI can train on and learn from. And if you want an enduring example of that, check out my video up here on the Genius A-star algorithm that 60 years on from its creation is still powering things like Google Maps. It's really amazing what human ingenuity can do, and our ability to learn about it on the internet, this massive treasure trove of information that we all share, that is also an amazing invention by humanity as a whole. So that's the general problem. One of the big issues that I see is that centralized AI is feeding the slop problem, or should I say centralized technology overall. In other words, we've got just a few companies like OpenAI and xAI and Meta and Google and just a few others. Just these few companies kind of bottleneck the potentiality. They constrain everything to go through them, which is great for those companies in the short term, but really bad for anything interesting and not corporate. So the result of this is we get boring generic outputs. Frontier models from big players are designed for safety and mass appeal, not for quirkiness and individuality. And that leads to sameness and blandness and corporate vanilla versions of the internet and everything that we see on it. And then of course there's the problem of power concentration. If just a few companies own the AI pipes, they control what everyone sees, whether by algorithmic bias, policy, or political pressure. And this feels like it could really trend towards that 1984 type of world where there is a centralized control that dictates everything that we humans do. And that is pretty terrifying. That goes even beyond killing the internet, but more towards killing society itself. And the ultimate problem for these large companies is one of economic incentive. These centralized players are optimized for scale, not authenticity, which drives slop at industrial levels. The whole point is to get more eyeballs on your app for more time. And that means if that AI slop gets more eyeballs right now, that's what they're going to do, even if it could potentially kill their own company in the future. These massive corporations are focused on the bottom line. They're focused on what the next quarterly results are. They're focused on gaining market share at the expense of we consumers and the smaller content creators that are creating the internet itself, the information on the internet, and even at their own expense, even at the expense of their own future viability as a company. That short-term economic incentive is very, very powerful. Okay, so lots of problems, and I promised you at the beginning that I would present some ideas for solutions and fixes. So how can we win? How can consumers and small content creators win over what looks like an inevitability, a steamroller coming towards us? I'm going to present a number of ideas. I don't know which one or ones will actually work, but I think one or more or a combination of multiple ones could actually win out over this AI slop. And it requires all of us to take part in that. We as smaller level content creators, but also we as consumers of that content need to be conscious of it. It's sort of like caring for what you eat, right? You don't want to just eat candy bars all day. Tastes really good right at the moment, but it's really bad for you over time. You need to be conscious and think about what you eat and be careful about what you eat, because that's going into your body and that's what you are basically. Well, this is effectively feeding your brain in the same way. So be careful about what you eat. That's the number one thing I could say. The first thing I can say from a content creator point of view is to lean into imperfection. We can signal authenticity by not removing the mistakes, the coughs, the ums, all of the stuff that goes on when we speak to prove that we are human. If we are brave enough to do this, and I usually cut out all of my mistakes and things, so I try not to show that stuff off, but usually my videos are, let's say, twice as long as what you actually see, because there's a lot of mistakes, dead ends, coughing, ums, all of that kind of stuff. If we are brave enough to leave that in, that is a proof of humanity. And I would say that it's much greater than the sterile perfection of AI generated videos. And in that line, I would say try to be transparent about this. Maybe as your opening statement or your closing statement, maybe state this was made by a real human, not AI. Maybe that's a way of sort of watermarking that this is a real human thing. Could AI copy that? Of course it could. But even so, I think there's a real value to saying this was made by a human and leave in some of the imperfection of the actual video. I think people will appreciate that. Again, to use the movie analogy, it would be like watching a cheap, low budget movie that had passion behind it. So even if it's a less than perfect artifact, it has that passionate nature to it. You can see the people behind it were actually creating something out of love rather than just making another piece of generic white bread, superhero movie that was being churned out by the dozens back in the late 2010s. Another possible way of fighting this is hyper-personal branding. In other words, for content creators, they can build their identity as their moat, their quirks, their voice, their personality. And of course, this already happens, but you can lean into it. So you get audiences following you, not just the content that you're creating, but you as your own entity. You then have a value as that creator, as a curator of whatever kind of content it is you create. You can act as a trusted filter or guide in a noisy AI landscape, and I think people will appreciate that and flock to it. And of course, as part of that, you can go into depth. You can be very niche. You can go into depth about specific topics. AI videos, at least right now, tend to be about broad topics and things, and they go for quantity rather than quality and depth. So if you specialize, if you have expertise, if you have long form storytelling, that is a way of differentiating yourself from the AI. Is this challenging in the current algorithmic environment? It most definitely is, but I think it's worth continuing that fight to create that expert, in-depth, quirky, interesting long form storytelling. Another play that could be really interesting is a countercultural play or retro, and this comes more from the audience. I would say that just like audiences for music have gone towards vinyl and things like that, or at least some niche of that audience, people have gone for the analog offline experience. You could do that as well as a content creator. You can seek out content creators that are doing things in a countercultural retro way. So what you can bank on in that case is the analog scarcity of humanity. That becomes the premium over the sort of generic widespread availability of AI. Kind of going the opposite direction, and I told you I was just going to throw out ideas here, is the decentralized, personalized AI as a solution. In other words, doing a tech-forward solution rather than a retro solution. What I'm thinking about is massive numbers of helper AIs. Instead of one model serving billions, like OpenAI and others do today, imagine millions of lightweight, fine-tuned, personalized AI working with individuals. With this, you get human-in-the-loop creativity, where these AIs are amplifiers of your style, your quirks, and your knowledge, rather than flattening them into averages. So the idea would be that I would have John, Dr. Know-It-All, and I would have my own AI, Dr. Know-It-All, that would be my own AI that would help me out. You would have a swarm of these personalized AIs that would be helpers and tools and amplifiers, rather than these giant generic models that squish everything down to the average. That would be a very, very different world, and I could get behind that. In that case, we go back to being humans wielding tools, not competing with the tool of AI. And that, I think, is a really interesting possibility. You get diversity by design because decentralization means there's no central authority that homogenizes the output. One person's AI could be irreverent and funny, another's deeply academic, another's deeply contrarian, contrarian. You can have all of these different AIs because just like there are billions of people on the planet, there could be billions of these personalized small AIs. And this should have an anti-slop effect. Personalized AIs trained on your life and your data can't as easily be farmed into generic content mills, and there's also just not the economic incentive because they're not big enough. I'm not creating enough content to be economically interesting on my own. These AIs, just like we human beings, would be too idiosyncratic to bother copying every individual one. And I would say in line with that, we need a new social media platform or platforms. We need something that favors the quirky individual imperfection of human creativity and questing, really honestly something akin to the YouTube of the earliest days of YouTube's creation back, 2010, 2011. In that era, YouTube really was tube. It was television for you, created by you, for you as individual people. That was the interesting and beautiful vision of YouTube when it was originally created. It's not that anymore. It's a giant behemoth underneath Alphabet and Google. And I think that the competition needs to come from grassroots. It needs to come from small companies that don't have to produce that much income. So they don't just content farm every human being on the planet. They're not just looking for every spare second of your life being spent on their platform. I think it's going to take a disruptor from the outside that's just willing to be small and not make that much money, but make some money to be able to fight this, to be able to combat this. So a new social media platform that would reward humans or reward humans plus AI working in quirky and individualistic ways, that is a real way forward in my mind. Is that a naive pipe dream? It might seem like it today, but I'm hoping that over time the power of these large companies will dissipate, at least to some extent, because they're too powerful right now, and I really don't want them becoming even more powerful than they are now. Also, if one of these social media platforms or multiple ones exist already and I don't know about it, let me know in the comments for sure. Thank you very much. So as I've pointed out in this video, AI slop is a huge and growing problem and even a threat to the dominant players that are using it right now, like Google in particular. However, I don't believe it's unstoppable. I think that authenticity and humanity can win. Consider this: would you rather trust a perfect robot or a flawed human, or would you rather watch a generic AI-generated mass-marketed video or something personal and quirky and human? And I think many of you would prefer the latter in both of those cases. Alrighty folks, that's what I got for you today. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. Hopefully most of those comments will be actual human comments and not bot comments. And while you're down there, if you don't mind liking the video, it really helps out with YouTube's neural networks and their algorithms. And if you want to see more of this kind of content, please consider subscribing. And I, as an actual human, will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.